This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated online cinema streaming exceptional films from around the globe. Get your first month for free at mubi.com/storytellers.
In studying English literature and talking a lot about it, I started to become more at ease with the idea that filmmakers, storytellers, they grasp evocative symbols, they grasp resonant imagery, and the reason these things are evocative and resonant is that they do have other layers, subconscious layers of resonance that the reader, or in the case of film, the filmgoer, can pick up on and interpret in their own way, and that is a valid approach. And that was something in retrospect, I very much needed to learn and get on board with.
After more than 80 years since his first appearance in Detective Comics Volume 27, the character of Batman remains one of the world's most iconic and well-regarded superhero figures of all time. And although numerous filmmakers have since attempted to translate the Caped Crusader's universal appeal onto the big screen, none have arguably done so as effectively as director Christopher Nolan with his Dark Knight trilogy.
My primary obligation was to look at the history of that character, 66 years of that history, and draw from that, distill from that the essence of what makes that legend. That really was the primary obligation.
I would argue that unlike some of the other iterations, Nolan's trilogy successfully managed to capture this underlying essence, transforming what could have otherwise been a run-of-the-mill superhero story into a three-part cinematic journey about a man haunted by a tragedy, fighting his inner demons to save his city and its people, and ultimately to save himself. In this first part in my series on the Dark Knight trilogy, I will take a closer look at Batman Begins and examine how Christopher Nolan utilized the symbolic power of the Batman character to construct the most evocative iteration of the Dark Knight's origin story to date.
The original inspiration behind the Dark Knight trilogy, and particularly Batman Begins, it was about taking this beloved character and recontextualizing the character.
Well, that was very important to me because I thought, Tim Burton's vision of Batman, I thought was extraordinarily stylized, quite brilliant actually, and very visionary, but extremely idiosyncratic and stylized. And what it denied me that I'd seen in the comics was the notion of Batman standing out against his environment, a relatively ordinary environment, so that the citizens of Gotham are as amazed by this iconic figure as the audience is, and a sense viscerally of the impact of everything he does. If you can believe in it, if you can relate it to the textures of everyday life, then I think you're taking the audience on a more extreme journey, because things seem real and they're investing in the concrete reality of these things.
And so for me, it was much more about creating a recognizably real scenario that the extraordinary figure of Batman could exist in, and addressing the origins of that, the origin story, which hadn't been told in films before, hadn't really even been addressed in the comics very specifically, actually. And so we were able to really look at that gap in pop culture and say, okay, what if we try to ground this and really explain how this might happen in a real world scenario? That was always the jumping off point for the tone of the films.
To Nolan, the symbolic power of the Batman story can only be effectively conveyed to an audience by stripping the character down to its core, and then grounding that archetypal essence into a palpable reality, thereby constructing a narrative that balances out the mythic and the real.
And what made me feel that I knew how to tell that story, because it's a very noirish story, it's very much a thriller. Yes, it's a superhero film, but at base level, it's based on these ideas of guilt, fear, these very, very strong impulses that the character has. And of course, the thing you always have to remember about Bruce Wayne and Batman, Bruce Wayne doesn't have any superpowers other than extraordinary wealth. He's, in that sense, very relatable and very human. And I think that's why I gravitated towards it, because they're stories that are massively operatic and appealing in their universal nature and their operatic, larger-than-life nature, but they're based on very, very relatable human beings, and in particular the figure of Bruce Wayne, who I think is a very fascinating, very primal figure at the heart of this fiction.
Why do we fall?
The story of Bruce Wayne in Nolan's trilogy is one that begins with and centers around a fall. This fall is both a literal fall as well as a symbolic descent into fragmentation and death, one that, as Jonathan Peugeot observed in his video on Batman, maps almost perfectly onto the story of the fall of man from the Garden of Eden. Bruce and Rachel are playing in the garden of Wayne Manor. Like Adam and Eve, they convey a sense of innocence and wholeness in their being. The Wayne family is covered in wealth and stands quite literally at the center of Gotham, the city which they helped create. But this sense of sufficiency and centeredness is suddenly disturbed when Bruce falls down a dark cave after stealing an arrowhead from Rachel. Like Adam and Eve with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Bruce's worldview is cracked as he is confronted with fear and an image of animality and death, which first takes the form in the arrowhead as a tool of death and a weapon of war, and then in the attacking swarm of bats. His helplessness is laid bare for only a moment, but it comes to be fully exposed shortly after when Bruce realizes that not even his parents can ultimately shield him from the realities of the outside world. Blinded by their sense of sufficiency, they willingly exit the theater into a dark alleyway where they are suddenly confronted by the knowledge of good and evil in the form of an armed mugger, who tragically kills Bruce's parents. Helpless and alone, Bruce realizes that he is naked. Like Adam and Eve, he falls from his garden. His harmonious bond with Rachel is broken, and he is left to compensate for his original sin, which is the guilt he feels for the death of his parents.
It was my fault, Alfred. I made them leave the theater. If I hadn't gotten scared.
It was nothing that you did.
Nolan then takes this symbolism of the fall and injects it into every level of the story. And so if the fall is something that happens to Bruce both literally and psychologically, it simultaneously plays itself out on a societal scale through Gotham City. The state of the city in ways becomes synonymous with the state of Bruce Wayne as a person.
I mean, we were trying to build a world in the way that, Ridley Scott had done in his films like Blade Runner, for example. We were looking at the silent era, Fritz Lang's films, and trying to figure out the use of the geography of a city to express a sense of metaphor or allegory with the narrative we're creating, which is what the world of Batman and Gotham as a sort of heightened version of a regular city, a kind of New York on steroids, if you like.
The death of its main protector at the hands of one of its own citizens exposes Gotham City to its insufficiency, as it attempts to cover this nakedness with an ever-thinning veil of justice and order.
This city is rotting. They talk about the Depression as if it's history, and it's not. Things are worse than ever down here.
In Bruce's absence, the Tower of Wayne Enterprises has been taken over by a corrupt new CEO. The city's insane asylum is run by a doctor more insane than the majority of his patients, and its justice system is bought and controlled by the town's biggest crime boss.
That's the power of fear.
And to push this imagery even further, Nolan shows us Wayne Manor as the symbol of the old order or the spirit of the city in a frozen and dilapidated state, like a repressed trauma one tries to cover up and forget about.
This place is a mausoleum. If I have my way, I'll pull the damn thing down brick by brick.
The city in its fallen state is not yet ready to face its demons, and neither is Bruce. His unexpected return to Wayne Manor is not one indicating a return to his center by means of personal transformation, but is rather fueled by a selfish and destructive desire for revenge. Bruce's near transformation from the legacy of the city's most cherished philanthropist into a lawless murderer then becomes the ultimate image of this cynical fallen state and this upside-down world. It's only through a stroke of luck and a slap in the face by Rachel that he's woken up out of his vengeful stupor. He realizes that to effectively fight the city's corruption, he first needs to understand the criminal mind. He needs to face his own insufficiency. So Nolan has him descend down into the edge of the world, into the underworld.
You in hell, little man.
This descent takes both the physical form of self-imposed exile, in which Bruce loses his high-status billionaire identity and lowers himself into the world of petty crime, but it's also the image of a psychological descent into the edge of his own being.
One of the fun things about the character, one of the great things about Batman is this sort of elemental nature, this kind of mythic quality that his story has. And I think the first third of our film, which really deals with his leaving Gotham and going around the world and finding the means to fight crime, essentially. I mean, there's a lot of, the Count of Monte Cristo, things like that. This kind of part of the story where the hero is forced or has to abandon his kingdom, if you like, and discover himself, and then returns changed. That's a really important part of the myth of the character, I think, but it hasn't really been addressed before.
Initially, however, Bruce's journey to self-discovery lacks a clear sense of higher purpose, as he gradually becomes disillusioned, bogged down, and ultimately stuck in this chaotic world, a prisoner to his own inertia.
You have been exploring the criminal fraternity, but whatever your original intentions, you have become truly lost.
Appearing to him at his lowest point like a projection from his own psyche, Ra's al Ghul offers to lift him out of his prison and to become a guardian of true order and justice by joining the League of Shadows. This moment marks the beginning of Bruce's mythic ascent, his journeying out of the underworld, out of the edge of his being, and towards his center. And as a fitting image to mark his starting transformation, Bruce has to pluck a rare winter flower as his potential of new life out of death, and bring it to the top of a mountain to the headquarters of the League of Shadows, where he will find the promise of a new identity. But in order to move into this new identity, Bruce has to supplement his insufficiency. And so, like Adam and Eve after the fall, who had to work the ground to stave off death, Bruce has to compensate for his nakedness by means of rigorous physical and cognitive training. But most importantly, he's forced to supplement his biggest weakness, which is the fear surrounding his childhood trauma.
Well, one of the first things that we uncovered, in the history of the character, what makes Batman essentially, was the rationalization or the explanation, really, of why he gravitates towards the bat, the figure of the bat, the symbol of the bat. But ultimately, when Alfred asks him, he says it's because he's afraid of bats. And so we started to weave fear into really every aspect of what Bruce Wayne has to deal with in the world. And so fear really underlies everything that goes on in the films.
You fear your own power. You fear your anger, the drive to do great, terrible things.
Bruce has to cover himself in fear in order to fight fear. He has to embrace the primal emotions surrounding his trauma and use those to fight the criminals of Gotham City.
To conquer fear, you must become fear. You must bask in the fear of other men.
But it's not until the very end of his training that Bruce realizes Ra's al Ghul's true intentions.
The city has become a breeding ground for suffering and injustice. It is beyond saving and must be allowed to die.
Ra's and the League of Shadows utilize their darkness to spread darkness, aiming to flood Gotham City to restore it to harmony. The ascent up the mountain is thus revealed to have been a false source of enlightenment, meant to lure the lost and the disillusioned into the hands of a tyrannical ideology. And in the same manner, the blue winter flower becomes not the image of potential new life, but is inverted into a symbol of death, as the League uses its toxic serum to spread fear and panic amongst its victims. But if the League of Shadows showcase the dangers of an extreme ideology on a physical level, they also come to represent the pathologies within the individual human being. On a personal level, Ra's al Ghul is part of Bruce's unconscious, of his shadow. A small part of him that exists hidden at the edge of his being. That part that comes to him at his lowest point, that shows him who he could become and that tempts him to fully indulge in his darkness, in his feelings of anger, guilt, and resentment. But instead of embracing this indulgence, Bruce sets the headquarters on fire, exposing his darkness to light, and rises out of the blaze, seemingly having integrated this part of his shadow. But in unknowingly saving Ra's al Ghul, Nolan shows us that Bruce is not yet ready to truly let go of his feelings of anger and resentment, and so he unconsciously leaves open the possibility for his shadow to retake control over his life.
Master Wayne, you've been gone a long time.
Yes, I have. There's an important scene in the jet between Alfred and Bruce Wayne after he leaves the League of Shadows, where he talks about the logic of becoming a symbol, why he has to become something more than just a man. And in Batman Begins, it became an important thing to get across.
As a symbol, I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting.
What symbol?
Something elemental, something terrifying.
Upon his return to Gotham, he realizes that his darkness can also be his ally, and so he ventures down into the caves hidden underneath Wayne Manor, down into his true identity, where he's once again greeted by his fear in the form of a swarm of bats. But this time around, he doesn't shrink back in panic, but instead shines a light on it and embraces it. And so, like Adam and Eve who covered their bodies in dead animal skins, so too Bruce covers himself in the form of the bat. Both as a physical armor, but also as a layer of animality. He understands the need to cover himself in fear and death, not to spread death, but to fight it. Using part of his animality, his shadow, and transforming it into a force of good. In order to then become a symbol, Bruce must utilize this new identity to take on the role as the Dark Guardian of Gotham City. In his monstrous and hybrid appearance, Batman participates in the imagery of the gargoyle, which, as Jonathan Peugeot has pointed out, is the architectural version of the mythological guardian at the edge of the world. And like the gargoyle designed to keep water out of buildings, Batman's job is to cover the realm from the forces of chaos that seek to flood it. And so as Bruce has started lighting up his shadow, so too Batman begins to illuminate the unattended to corruption in Gotham City.
As a guiding principle, I always wanted to try and align the audience with Bruce Wayne's perception. My fascination with storytelling in films is all about that subjectivity. It's all about whose point of view am I seeing the story from. That's very much the game. It's creating a maze and then putting the audience into the maze with the rat, if you like, rather than hanging above it and seeing him make the wrong turns. You kind of make those mistakes with the character.
Bruce is not yet fully formed in his new identity, and the question arises whether he's doing this more out of personal interest than out of a sense of selfless devotion to the people of Gotham City.
Well, we both care for Rachel, sir. But what you're doing has to be beyond that. It can't be personal, or you're just vigilante.
Nolan represents this separate part of Bruce's shadow in the form of the Scarecrow. Much like Ra's al Ghul, Dr. Crane's frightful alter ego is shown to be an inverted guardian of sorts. Instead of helping his psychiatric patients to confront their inner demons, he indulges in fear and chooses to spread it amongst his victims for his personal gain. Instead of keeping the monsters out, he actively poisons the city's water supply, turning it from a controlled force of renewal into a destructive flood. And so if Ra's al Ghul is the manifestation of Bruce's unacknowledged resentment and anger, of the potential tyrannical figure that he could easily become, the Scarecrow comes to represent his inner selfishness, the danger of Batman becoming a tool for Bruce's ego.
You have a name to maintain.
I don't care about my name.
It's not just your name, sir. It's your father's name. And it's all that's left of him.
And unsurprisingly, it's at this exact moment when all of these bubbled up emotions come to a head that Ra's al Ghul suddenly reappears in Bruce's life. An idea, like our more animal nature, can never be truly done away with. And if one is not paying close enough attention, these forces can take over and cause great damage to one's life. Nolan then shows us the image of this dying of the old order in the burning of Wayne Manor, with Bruce Wayne literally having collapsed under the weight of his trauma. And it's Alfred in his role as wise old man and as Bruce's conscience who pushes him to keep on fighting to save his own life. And so the destructive fire as a marker of death is turned into the beginning of a rebirth, both in the lifting up of the crippling weight of Bruce's trauma and in the going down into his inner being in order to face himself one more time.
What have I done, Alfred?
And so as Bruce has to venture into his trauma once more, so too Gotham City has to confront its insufficiency in an ultimate struggle. This confrontation is appropriately placed on the island of the Narrows. As this dark, lawless slum, home to the downtrodden and the mentally ill, and existing as this undefined place connecting two parts of the city, the Narrows act as the symbolic mirror image of the alleyway. And the confrontation that ensues there can therefore be seen as the societal manifestation of Bruce's childhood trauma. Ra's al Ghul's vaporizer turns Gotham's water supply into a panic-inducing poison, causing a flood of fear and chaos to spread throughout the island, exposing its people to their insufficiencies in a literal mist of confusion and terror. Now possessed by its shadow, like Bruce in the years after the murder of his parents, Gotham is on the verge of tearing itself apart. Traveling like an infection through a body, Ra's al Ghul takes the vaporizer towards the heart of the city and its main water network underneath Wayne Tower. If this center is reached, the entire city will be flooded in fear and will collapse upon itself. These events simultaneously perfectly mirror what is happening in Bruce's unconscious, functioning as the image of his trauma threatening to consume him whole. And it's only by finally letting go of his attachment to his fear, his anger, and his selfish resentment that this part of his shadow can be integrated into his identity, as shown in the final lighting up of Ra's al Ghul beneath Wayne Tower. Flying off into the night, Bruce is now fully established and committed to his role as Batman, and has made great strides in his ascent towards his center and his identity as an individual. And in the same manner, Batman has pulled Gotham City out of death and has helped it to face its own fears in his role as the supplement or the guardian of the city, and in his efforts to mass produce an antidote against the fear poison.
The antidote. One for Gordon to inoculate himself, the other for mass production.
But also, and more importantly, in the way that he's starting to become a symbol of hope, a sign that the city can and should stand up for itself and make its own ascent from its fallen state.
You really started something. Bad cops running scared, hope on the streets.
Nolan then adds to this sentiment by showing the salvaging of the spirit of Bruce's parents in the rebuilding of Wayne Manor. The previously frozen and burdensome trauma is transformed into a means to strengthen Bruce's character and his resolve.
What will you do?
Rebuild it. Just the way it was, brick for brick.
And yet the final return to the harmony of the garden has not yet been accomplished. The unity of masculine and feminine cannot yet be re-established. Because although Bruce has strengthened his being and has provided the city with courage and the hope for a better future, he's still disjointed in his identity.
The man I loved. The man who vanished. He never came back at all.
His ascent has only just begun, and now that he has opened the door to the insufficiencies of his inner being, more shadows will emerge and more resistance will need to be faced before a return to harmony can take place.
Yes, I mean, he's a very complex, heroic figure. And I think what I wanted to do by the end of the film is leave the audience with a sense of having seen and experienced heroics and a sense of triumph, but that's oddly tempered, and that's very much sort of Gary Oldman's role at the end of the film, is to just introduce this slightly bittersweet note of things are not all wonderful and it's not simple.
What about escalation?
Escalation.
There is an idea that we got from the comics about escalation and about the fact that Bruce Wayne's response to criminality is as extreme as it gets. That's going to prompt an equally extreme response ultimately, and so there is a sense of things being visited upon Gotham because of Bruce Wayne's actions. And that's something that I think is very important to the story. I mean, I find Bruce Wayne not to be unpleasant. I think he's damaged goods. I think he's a character that I wanted the audience to have a lot of sympathy for, and that's why we spend a lot of time showing what happened to him as a child and how he's arrived at where he is. It's somebody not being able to overcome their most selfish instincts. It's somebody finding a way to sublimate them and finding a way to channel them into this different persona. And I think that the more that those flaws are allowed to just bubble under the surface, underneath the sort of triumphalism, I think that makes it makes it more like real life, frankly.
With Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan has captured the essence of the Batman, an essence that we as human beings can universally relate to. It's the tale of a tragic fall, of a person and a society ripped apart by trauma and corruption, engulfed by feelings of guilt, anger, fear, and grief. It's the journey of a man starting to come to terms with his insufficiencies, both within and without, lifting himself out of death and transforming the tragedy of his life into the beginning of a long and arduous ascent.
Those were a lot of things feeding into the way in which we approached telling those three stories, or one big story over three films. And we went into it not knowing that we would get to make three films. We approached Batman Begins very much as an isolated piece, but always with a sense that, okay, if we could, we would return to Gotham, we would try and flesh out, a bigger story, because we were interested to see in our telling, there was always a finite sense to what he was doing. It felt that he would need to view this as a character he's created or a symbol he's created to try and inspire the people of Gotham, and that there would be an end game to that he would have an effect on the world and then be able to stop. And so we became very interested in seeing how that story would play out.
And now a quick word about our sponsor. Mubi is a unique streaming service that at any given time has just 30 films available. Every day they add a film, and every day they take one away. And this curated selection always consists of high-quality films and documentaries from all over the globe, many of which you might not be familiar with and which you likely wouldn't be able to find on many other streaming services. For instance, if you like auteur films, right now in the US, Mubi is streaming films by Werner Herzog, Steven Soderbergh, and a brand new documentary on the set photographer of Apocalypse Now, a great companion piece to its final cut, which has recently hit cinemas. So, if you sign up now, you not only get 30 days free access to their entire assortment of films, but you also help us sustain the channel by showing your appreciation to a company that has consistently helped us to make more videos for you guys to enjoy. So if all of that sounds good to you, head on over to mubi.com/storytellers where you can get that extended 30-day free trial. Again, that's mubi.com/storytellers where you can sign up to help us out. Thanks, guys.